Welcome, Bob Doman, to Autism Spa. It's a real honor and pleasure to have you here. I've read a lot about what the National Association for Child Development is doing over the years, and really your work and commitment to autism development and helping families across the country get better outcomes than I think they're accustomed to. So maybe we can start with your background. You know, how did you end up in this field? And we'll go from there.
Well, I actually grew up in the field. My father was a physiatrist, MD specializing in rehabilitation. So if you would, I grew up in rehab centers, United Cerebral Palsy centers, kind of living the life of the brain and how to affect the brain and development. So I was immersed in it from a tiny child.
Right.
I actually went to college planning on being an architect. I was actually into building energy efficient semi-subterranean housing.
Wow, that's a big jump.
That was in 1965.
Right.
And I happened to get a summer job that my father arranged for me. It was a Title I program working with children with a variety of handicaps, brain injury, Down syndrome, autism. And my job was to teach them math when the professionals couldn't teach them any math.
Right, right.
And I really had no interest in teaching.
Right.
I really never particularly liked math. But it was a job. I had to, all right. And I have been taught if you get a job, you do the job and you do it well.
That's right. That's right.
So I actually took what little bit I knew and created a math program based on my understanding of neurodevelopment.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And it was shockingly successful.
Mm-hmm.
These kids who had, with years with special education, hadn't learned any math, in a 6-week program, generally gained 2 years in their math function.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And the result of that was my understanding there's something really wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
If this dumb college kid who knows nothing about education can do something that the people who supposedly know what they're doing can't do.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you will, I identified a mission, and I've been on that mission ever since.
Wow. And so you kind of got into it because your father obviously blazed a trail, but you didn't have a special needs child or a loved one. You just kind of fell into it because of your life path.
Yes.
Wow. Well, you know, it's funny. Most doctors, people I talk to in this field, they all have some loved one, but it sounds like, you know, every child on the spectrum is one of your loved ones, and that's why you're really doing what you're doing.
Absolutely. And you know, a bit of it too is as a kid, I had, you know, if I was a child in first grade today,
right,
I could be labeled dyslexic, learning disabled, attention deficit disordered, auditory processing disorder. You know, fortunately, I was just perceived as a smart kid who wasn't reading too well.
Right, right. Well, I think a lot of people, a lot of people relate to that. You know, I think a lot of people look at the labels that society gives us, and you know, if we believed our labels, we'll never get anywhere.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, from your background, you kind of moved towards this field, and the National Association, or really the Child Development, came about. How did that kind of become the vehicle to deliver better services?
If you will, you know, I started off teaching in special education. At the ripe age of 23, I developed kind of a new approach to special education and created a little revolution at the special school and United Cerebral Palsy organization I worked for, and became clinical director in charge of all the teachers and therapists at 23.
Right.
Which was a heck of an experience.
Right.
You know, I was the youngest person on staff. I had 60 people under me. And I discovered with frustration that I couldn't make the teachers do what they needed to do. I could not get past their education.
Right.
All right. And at the same time, I was in a master's program for special education, which I ended up being disgusted with and walking out the door.
Right.
It was totally based on, if you have this, these are your limitations. If you have this, these are your limitations. And speaking about what could be done and what potential there is, essentially got me ostracized. Right. I didn't want to hear it. Didn't want to hear it. When it conformed to the mediocrity of what they were doing. And unfortunately, that really hasn't changed. It's still the same today.
It is. It is.
Okay. So I went from there and I worked with an international group, did work in Spain, did work in Israel, design programs for a couple organizations in the States. And in '79, the groups I worked with said, you really need to take this nationally, and said you need to start an organization to do that. And so today we're international. We have chapters around the country, chapters outside the country, work with children from literally all over the world with a full range of issues.
Wow. So the center is obviously active internationally. How do families get to you? How would I discover I need help that the typical cookie cutter system isn't giving me? How do I get to you?
Most of the families come to us as a referral from a family-owned program.
Okay.
The vast majority. All right. Beyond that, we have a website, NACD.org. We've got hundreds and hundreds of articles and videos, a ton of information that's just there.
Right. Right.
And families, end up often getting to our website and discovering who we are from there. So
a lot of the services are produced kind of remotely, because families could be all over the country.
Yeah, we have, we generally do assessments on a child every 4 months.
Okay.
With ongoing coaching.
Okay.
And the assessments can be in person in one of our chapters or via Skype or whatever.
Okay.
Right. And of course, fortunately, last year we had the mechanism set up to deal with everyone online.
Okay.
So we didn't lose too many steps in the process.
So that covers the background, how we got here, what the center is about. Now let's talk about autism and really what you've discovered in your lifetime of research and case studies and working with families. What is it and how can we make lives better for our families?
I think the first recommendation I would have for most families is remember the name you gave your child and use that as their label.
Right.
Okay. All the associated labels really do nothing to help your child.
Right.
Essentially, every label comes with its baggage and its limitations.
Right.
So step number one, you perceive your child as a truly unique individual who never existed before, who will never exist again.
Right.
Okay. Then you need to understand that your child, like every child, is complex.
Right.
When you really get into the nitty-gritty of any child, they're incredibly complex little creatures.
Right.
Be they typical kids or kids on the spectrum. We only will work with a whole child.
Mm.
I had somebody contact us recently, say, gee, can we come to you just for speech therapy? And the answer is no, you cannot come to us for just speech therapy.
Right.
Because if your child has a problem with their speech, there's a plethora of issues that can create that and contribute to that problem.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Right.
And to do your child justice, we have to deal with your whole child, from their health and their nutrition and their sleep and their siblings to all of the pieces that are sort of unique to kids on the spectrum.
Right.
All right. But, we call what we do a targeted developmental intervention. All right. We have to be targeted to the specific pieces of that individual child
Mm-hmm.
and approach it with a perception that our goal is to help that child be as great as they can possibly be,
Right.
without any limitations.
Right.
Okay. You know, if you will, I just got a video yesterday from one of my families, a Romanian family that moved to Ireland for their brain injury, cerebral palsy son.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And the dad made this really cool video about his boy
Mm-hmm.
and talks about, you know, the work and the believing what could be in spite of what all the professionals said
Mm-hmm.
could not be.
Mm-hmm.
Professionals said your child's never going to crawl, creep, walk, talk. He's going to probably be mentally retarded.
Mm-hmm.
The 5-year-old child is brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And with a lot of work, he is now creeping on his hands and knees in what we call a cross pattern.
Right.
He can do that. He's going to walk.
Right.
All right?
Wow.
And if this family had believed what they were told relative to what the potential was,
Right.
it obviously never would have happened.
Not a, you know, I just have to mention when you say that, it makes me think of the day we took my 13-year-old son now to the regional center to get diagnosed officially at 3 years old, right? That's when all the social services started kicking in. We knew before, and he was in therapy before, but we took him in and they gave him this test, and this person with a PhD after their name basically told us he'll never amount to anything. She didn't say it in those words, but she basically said there's nothing there. There doesn't, whether you put him in any kind of training or class won't make any difference.
Yeah.
And honestly, as a parent, it took me 3 days to recover from that message and to kind of put it aside and say, I'm not going to listen to that. And it was the worst 3 days of my life.
Oh, I bet.
Kind of someone telling you your son's not there.
Yes.
That was
Yes.
just horrible. And
Right.
I can imagine many parents across the country get that news. And when you're new to autism, you sometimes are grieving naturally as a human being that your son or your child is suffering, and you don't know how to help because you don't have all this knowledge and expertise and life lessons. But you get this news and it's just devastating. And you're just not prepared for it until, what you said, I mean, people have to realize that their child is there and they deserve every lesson and every effort to make them the best they can be, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But it's not what the label that, frankly, the institutions, whether it's insurance or regional centers or educational system, put on our child.
Yeah. If you will, the prognosis that the professionals and the system gives us is based on their failure.
Right.
All right, not
Right.
the potential of the child.
Right.
And when I look at, you know, how you need to approach the kids, what you need to do, and what is typically done, it's a joke.
Yeah.
You know, gee, let's do, you know, first of all, let's separate your child into little pieces rather than look at your whole child.
Right.
Let's essentially disregard the parent who is a real expert on the child.
Right.
All right? We professionals are going to do it all.
Right.
We professionals, you know, our speech therapist is going to give your child a half hour a couple times a week.
Right.
All right. And the OT the same. And maybe the PT.
Right.
All right. And we're going to throw them into a variety of school situations, none of which fit your child.
Yep.
Okay?
Yeah.
You know, we're going to mainstream them, which it was typically is pretend.
Right.
All right.
Right.
Or we're going to put, you know, the worst environment you can put a autistic child into is a classroom full of autistic children.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
That's the worst.
Yeah. Right.
You put any child in that environment, good luck.
Right.
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 You know, so what the vast majority of children are receiving is nothing close to an opportunity.
Right. Right.
So how can we expect, you know, good outcomes from that?
Yeah. So how do we break the cycle? Because the government institutions that and educational systems that govern most public systems, this is the only way they know, and parents don't know any better.
Well, you know, if you will, the last 50 years or so, education has attempted to move parents out of the process.
Hmm. Hmm.
And if you will, if you look at education and say, where are people successful educationally?
Mhm.
It's generally successful when that cultural group is proactive in education,
Right.
all right? Parents need to be proactive and assume the responsibility.
Right.
And if there are resources within the system that they want to use, fine.
Right.
But, all right, you're not going to get good outcomes if the people working with your child don't have the same perception of their potential that you have.
Right.
All right.
Right.
So the families we work with, we work directly with the family.
Mhm.
Essentially, our job is to design a comprehensive program, train the parents and caregivers to work with the child, provide daily ongoing coaching, and then make it very dynamic. So we're constantly changing, modifying based on the outcomes we're receiving.
Mhm.
But it's heavily, heavily, heavily based on the family, on the parents.
Right. So tell me what autism is. I think you wanted to kind of explain it in a way that maybe is different than what most people perceive it to be.
Okay. Basically, it's a neurodevelopmental problem.
Sure.
The cause is still questionable.
Right.
But, from my standpoint, researchers can work on the cause and get to that. All right.
Right.
My concern, here's the child as Johnny is.
Right.
What do we do to make Johnny whole? The foundational problem to this neurodevelopmental problem is sensory dysfunction.
Right.
Your brain develops based on the input your brain receives.
Right.
In the computer world, they used to say garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
All right. If you're not seeing things appropriately, hearing them appropriately, feeling them, tasting them, smelling them appropriately, your brain's not going to develop appropriately.
Right.
So at the foundation is looking at the sensory function and looking to normalize the sensory function. I was part of a group in 1972. All right, we had what was called the autistic unit.
Mm.
And we were kind of the first ones to understand the sensory foundation,
Mhm.
all right, with this problem. And the world is still 50 years behind in understanding that.
Right.
For example, common thing, the reason autistic kids were first called childhood schizophrenics is because of lack of eye contact. All right.
Right.
There's a psychiatric reason for this lack of eye contact. No, wrong. All right.
Mm.
The reason we don't have good eye contact is we don't have good central vision.
Mm.
All right. The child largely uses their peripheral vision.
Mm.
All right.
Mhm.
So when they're looking at you like this, they're looking at you. When they're looking like this, they're probably not seeing you.
Mm.
All right. And the reason they do all these funny things with their hands and flapping and all that
Mhm.
is playing with their peripheral vision, which is enhanced.
Mm.
Right.
Mm.
So,
Wow.
there are issues in all the sensory channels. And every individual child has different degrees of problems in different sensory areas. So we have to identify where those issues are
Mhm.
and work at correcting those.
Mhm.
That's kind of foundational.
Right.
So then we're getting good quality information into the brain.
Right.
Then we need to work at developing cognitive function. Cognitive function is based on auditory and visual sequential processing.
Right.
So how many pieces you can take in a sequence and process.
Right.
So if you've got your child is such that they can't follow a verbal direction,
Right.
the processing is 0.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
If you can say, Johnny, touch your nose, Johnny can touch his nose. Okay, we're one. All right. We can say, Johnny, touch your nose and your ear. Boom, boom. We're a two. Guess what happens at two? Language starts kicking in at a two. All right. And when we sequence 3 and 4 and 5, that cognition builds and builds and builds. The language builds, the understanding builds, the ability to write and interact with the world builds. Right? So that's another big piece. One of the things that really hurts the kids is something I term debilitating sensory addictive behaviors, which most people call STIMs.
Right.
Okay. STIMs is a cute little word.
Right.
All right. And generally perceived as, just a thing they do.
Right.
A little strange. All right. But no, it's not a little thing they do. It's debilitating, it's sensory, and it's an addiction.
Right. Right.
And if you will, it's playing with what's broken in a sensory channel. Excuse me.
It's okay.
And generally breaking it some more.
Right.
Right. If I'm hyperperipheral and I'm doing this, stimulating my peripheral vision.
Right.
Guess what? My peripheral vision keeps getting stronger and my central vision keeps getting weaker.
Interesting. Right. Right.
And it is an addiction.
Right.
Addiction is something you can't do without.
Right.
You see these kids, they'll stim before they'll eat.
Right. Right.
Right. That's a pretty big addiction.
Right.
All right.
Right.
So what does the addicted brain want to do? Feed the addiction.
That's right.
What doesn't the addicted brain want to do? Explore the world and be present.
Right.
Okay. We tend to think that most of what we know someone taught us. Truth is, most of what we know because we're present. We're looking at the world, we're listening to the world, we're paying attention to what's going on, and we're learning. Right? So if you will, the child who is sensory dysfunctional, stimming, is not present, is not learning. They're stuck.
Right.
Okay. All right. Then we get the problem. A lot of the kids perseverate, which is a little different than debilitating sensory addiction. Perseveration means when they first start taking in some information, they get stuck on it. You have the kids who will watch the same piece of a video 10,000 times.
Right. Right.
Someone might say, well, that probably isn't a good thing to do. No, it's not a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That becomes another addiction. And the reason they perseverate with it is because they memorize it. They have pieces in it that they anticipate. And when it happens, they get an endorphin rush, become more addicted to it.
Right.
Right. So the more they watch it, the stronger the addiction, the stronger the addiction.
But, yeah.
Then they visualize it.
Right.
The video that they watch, they really get to the point they really don't need to turn on YouTube to see it. They've got it up here.
Right.
And they're walking around and you're trying to get, Johnny, let's put your socks on. And Johnny's playing his video in his head.
Right. Johnny's
not present.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So we need to avoid the perseverations.
Yeah.
Another significant piece, independence is incredibly important.
Right.
For example, I can look at two very similar children. One child who learned to self-feed, when they were 18 months old, and the other child whose parents fed them till they were 3 or 4 years old.
Right.
Okay? Could be cultural, whatever. All right. The difference in the development of those two children is amazing. Because that child who started feeding themselves at 18 months started learning independence at 18 months. The more independent a child is, the more they initiate doing new things. right? Initiation is what pushes development,
Right.
okay?
Right.
Now, if you will, part of what destroys the independence is something that many, many kids on the spectrum are being taught, which is prompt dependency.
Mm.
Okay? I know the autistic world loves ABA.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah. I don't either.
Okay?
Yeah.
I think it does a fantastic job of making kids prompt dependent.
Yep.
All right. You know, and in England, they do a great job with ABA.
Mm.
I remember seeing this 20-year-old gal in England who had been through ABA. I swear you could put that poor girl in a chair, and if somebody didn't tell her to get up, she'd stay there till she starved to death.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Somebody has to say, get up.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
The more prompt dependent you are, the less independent you are, the less you initiate.
Right. Right. Right.
So, you know, when you get into any individual child, there are a lot of these pieces that you have to look at
Right.
and interact with, and not the least of which are general health kind of problems,
Right. Physical
dietary
problems. Yeah.
problems, and sleep issues, which drive everyone insane.
Right. Right.
Right.
Right. Right. How do you feel about medication? Because a lot of, I mean, typical families, you know, the only access they have is to a pediatrician, who then refers you to a psychiatrist, who then starts prescribing pills to manage the behaviors.
There's very few things that we work with that I'm pessimistic about.
Yeah.
Children who have received and been on these medications for a period of time, I'm pessimistic about what we can do.
Mm. Mm.
All right. It seems to alter the brain in such a way we can't get it back.
I see.
So,
I see.
you know, if there's emergency situations where you need to use something and control it, okay.
That's different. Yeah.
But the less the better. And certainly, you know, I mean, there's, you know, we know how to control behavior today.
Right.
We know how to modify behavior today.
Yeah.
All right. Most parents, sadly, and most people working with the kids really don't understand rewards and consequences.
Right.
You know, I remember lecturing to a group of teachers regarding behavior. And the teachers would say, well, Johnny does such and such. Johnny gets out of his desk and gets under his desk.
Right.
And I said, well, what do you do? Well, I record it.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
You do anything to fix it? Do you do anything to change it? No, I record it.
Hmm.
You know, we need to address what's wrong and what's broken and fix it.
I see.
And not medicate the kids into oblivion.
You know, those as one parent, I think the tough points kind of emerge around 5 or 6. It seems like, I don't know, maybe there's another threshold, but at 5 or 6, I think parents begin to see, okay, they're not making any progress in their typical public educational system, maybe 7, 8. So either I need to pull them out and put them in a special school, or I need to medicate, or I need to do something else. But certain trajectories are decided at a certain milestone in a parent's and a child's life that, as you say, seems to determine ultimately how they're going to get along.
Yeah. One of the big pieces there is the processing that I referred to earlier,
Right.
Sequential processing. To put that in perspective, typically a child who's a year to 18 months processes one piece. 18 months to about 3 years, 2 pieces. 3 to 4.5, 3 pieces. All right, it goes sequential. That processing correlates to kind of global maturity.
Mhm.
All right. You know, terrible twos are associated with processing two pieces,
Right.
which is essentially the child's brain saying, I want or don't want. End of discussion. There are no buts here.
Right.
All right.
Right.
And if I don't get it, I'm going to have a tantrum.
Right.
All right. That's not too scary when your kid's 2.
Right.
It's pretty scary when they're 5.
Right.
And it's really scary when they're 13.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So often the behavior is commensurate with the level of processing.
Right.
And like any child, to change that, we have to change their ability to process their complexity of thought.
Right. So it sounds like the sooner parents can get to these alternatives and kind of open their mind and what their child is capable of, the better chances you'll have in shepherding these kids on a more constructive path.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
I learned a lot. Selfishly, I was looking at your website and the YouTube article I read about, and then as you mentioned, the addiction, it all kind of makes sense. The peripheral vision all makes sense. Just as one example, my son has multiple meltdowns, and it's all governed around his addiction. He doesn't have meltdowns for any other reason than when his YouTube video is mixed up, or he doesn't, day to day, he's fine, very docile. He is unfortunately medicated, but I assume millions of families make those tough choices. It was a very difficult decision. Just like families have to decide, do I send my child to a home, or do I try to, those severe cases where self-injury is a factor. So, families face a lot of tough choices, and I'm certainly not the one to judge whether they did the right thing or not.
Yeah.
No, none of us are. But, looking at kind of just, I had an aha moment when you're talking about addiction. It all kind of makes sense that he has an addiction, at least my son does, that we haven't treated.
Yes.
And that's what's wrong, ultimately. Right.
I mean, it's not hard to relate to drug addicts.
Right.
How does a drug addict, what are they going to do to get their drug?
Right.
Anything.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah.
By the way, if I could, I would outlaw YouTube in every home, every child on the spectrum.
Yeah. No, I saw the article, and believe me, like I said, he has no meltdowns other than YouTube related. The frustration, or if he loses a video, and like, again, as you mentioned, that repetitive video playing over and over and over again is addictive to him. Obviously, I'm sure many families have the same type of problem. When they're 1 or 2, you kind of sit them in front of a YouTube or an iPad, and parents get a break. So it's kind of that's really where it starts from, right? It's parents that need a break. They find something shiny on the computer, and that's it. You blink and 5-10 years go by, and now they're fully addicted. Maybe they're medicated, and unfortunately, as I was talking with others, the child is important, but the family unit, the environment that the child is in, is equally in pain and suffering like the child is.
Absolutely.
And go ahead.
Just to comment on your, using the tube to survive. Truth is, for developing central macular vision, the tube is the best therapeutic tool there is, because it demands your central vision.
Right.
The biggie is you've got to have a mountain of different content.
Right.
They can't watch the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
You can, in fact, help their central vision. It can be educational, it can be developmental.
Yeah.
You just don't let them watch the same darn thing over and over.
Oh my God, that is such a tough thing. But like I said, I mean, really, families need to go through therapy with their child, because you have sibling issues, you got marriage issues, you got work stress issues, and kids, being the sponges that they are, whether they're special needs or not, they pick up on all that stress at home.
Yeah, that's why we have daily coaching available for all of our families, because it is the whole family,
Right. Right.
the whole child in the whole family.
Right. Right. Well, this has been fascinating. I learned so much, and I know we just kind of touched the tip of the iceberg, Bob, but thank you so much for spending some time with us. I really refer all of our families to go to your website. It's NACD.org, right? And it's a wealth of information, and subscribing to it and really beginning to plug into all the services that you offer. The sooner the better. And no matter what it is, I think it'll help your child be better than they can be, the best they can be, really. Thank you so much, Bob. Please stay in touch.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Hang on.